Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Thanks for joining. This is going to be a lot of fun today. I have a person here with me, Isaac, who I met almost 2 years ago. It was right at the beginning of the pandemic. We connected virtually back then, and I'm really happy to have you on the show, Isaac. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. Thanks for the opportunity. It's good to be here.
Exactly. So maybe just as a little intro, maybe you can present yourself. Like you work at a technology company. You bring people together. I love that field actually a lot. So can you tell us what you usually do?
Yeah, absolutely. So I work for a company called Landmark Ventures. We're headquartered in New York City, where nobody lives or works anymore, but we are headquartered there. We provide a combination of advisory, banking, and capital services to enterprise tech startups. My personal space is industrial technologies or Industry 4.0 startups. So spent a lot of time looking at the use of digital tech within manufacturing and supply chain, and certainly excited to talk about it today with you, Stefan.
Very nice. Very interesting. So you basically bring companies technology forward. You have to explain that technology usually to people. You have to show them some examples, right? What other companies have done. You have to show them, of course, the benefits, the value of it. How has that changed over the last 12 to 16 months?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question. So our job has always been pretty virtual, right? Like we spend a lot of time just meeting with people and having virtual meetings. I've personally worked remotely from home for about 5 years from Denver. So my day to day didn't change a lot. But what obviously changed for the startups that we work with was that they couldn't go visit customers, right? They couldn't, in a lot of cases, these are companies that need to install things in factories or in warehouses or in physical operating environments. And they couldn't go to the places anymore. So everyone had to learn to, remotely install, ship stuff, train people remotely. It placed an increasing emphasis just on any workforce enablement tools, right? Anything that would enable people to collaborate or communicate or solve problems without having to be somewhere. That became, a huge focus area for every big industrial company that we've been working with.
Exactly. And as you said, the need, like there is a need, right? And this needs to be satisfied, which is at the end bringing specific knowledge to a specific point in the plant, to a specific location. Additionally, and that's something that we want to talk about the first 10 minutes probably, is what processes have you seen have been actually automated, where now it's not really a person anymore, it's actually some kind of bot or program, and we have put together some information, some slides, and you said, for example, also financial services, which I know are very much advanced in this space. So what have you seen when it comes to programs, and what levels of programs are there that help nowadays to execute very routinary digital jobs?
Sure. So like if you look at the industrial IoT or industry 4.0 space, obviously everybody's been talking about predictive maintenance, since IoT became a big buzzword, right? But I don't know how many companies spent a lot of money on it. And most companies still just fix things after they explode, right? That's how most companies operate. But at least there are a lot of companies that would have maintenance technicians walking around with handheld probes to check on stuff, or they would inspect machines. I think that over the course of the pandemic, we did see a lot of automated predictive maintenance solutions, right? Just installing sensors, connected sensors on critical machines at a much higher scale than we did before the pandemic because, well, you couldn't send as many people around the plant to check on things and see if there were forward indicators of failure. And then failure, unplanned downtime became even more expensive because you couldn't send anybody anywhere to fix anything. So I think that's a good example of a technology that people were already interested in and talking about, but rolled out at a much higher scale during the pandemic. And yeah, that I think that it's not traditionally what you might call automation, but it's certainly an automation technology from that standpoint. So that's probably the easiest one that comes to mind.
Yeah, and definitely within the industry, that one has had a very solid use case. Lots of people saw it. In other industry, like if you compare these six fields, not necessarily industries, it's six fields. Which one have you seen the most growth from an automation standpoint when it comes to digital bots?
probably supply chain management is the one where we're spending the most time.
Okay.
Like specifically within procurement, you know, when like you work for a big auto company, right? If you're going to buy materials or parts from somebody, or if one of your OEM customers is going to buy something from you, the amount of tedious manual work that goes just into the procurement paperwork and like all the systems that you have to enter everything in, and it's the same thing that you have to enter into 40 different things, right? Like that's a really easy area for a bot to replace that kind of manual work. So certainly within the supply chain procurement and finance function, we've seen a lot of activity. Yeah, that's probably the one that we see the most.
Yeah, exactly. And also those, since the data for those applications was already native digital, right? We were, yeah, it's not necessarily that they had to actually put some sensors on stuff, right? It was already there. It was just, instead of somebody maybe using the interface or manually typing in stuff, or even copying from one sheet to another, both being digital and native information. Maybe you added, what has been your experience like from regarding supply chain shipping, RFIDs, GPS? Has there been some progress, or is it still very much the same?
There has been. So I guess one of the things that we've seen a lot of, and it's a different kind of automation than what you're talking about here, but we saw a lot of companies finally roll out AGVs in warehouses and factories, which is something a lot of manufacturing companies have been experimenting with, but it was really just an experiment. But there, you know, given the staffing issues so many of these companies had, and just the fact that people didn't want people to have to go from one environment to another and potentially infect other people, we saw a lot of, you know, self-driving warehousing vehicles that could, you know, go to the stock room and pick something up and bring it to the production floor automatically. Again, it's something people have been experimenting with for a long time, but we had a lot of big manufacturing companies reach out to us at the beginning of the pandemic with a prioritization list of the different kinds of technologies they were looking for, and robotic AGV, you know, warehousing vehicles was on a lot of lists. We saw a lot of that.
Nice. Interesting. Yeah, and if it's a big warehouse and if the container sizes are similar, I think that's pretty straightforward technology to implement, right? It only becomes complicated when it's very different sizes, different locations, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And before we switch more to the human enhancing portion of it, which I'm super excited about, I'm total believer of enhancing human technologies, not even when it comes to physically being stronger or faster, also when it comes to health, energy, and ergonomics. I want to talk about what you have seen. What are the root causes that you usually see when a process like that fails, right? Because we always talk about the good stuff, always the sunny side, but most, let's be honest, most of the process fail, and then we go back to Axel and we go back to manual process. We hire a bunch of people. What do you think is those 5 reasons? Maybe we can talk a little bit first of what RPA stands for, and then why it fails, or if these 5 things I put up here are on your list.
Yeah, these are certainly among the major overarching categories, right? So robotic process automation has been around for a while, and in its more rudimentary form, it's nothing more than just an Excel macro, right?
Yeah.
It's not a complicated thing. Some of the more advanced tools in this category that get a little bit beyond that, you know, I'm trying to map them onto what you have here. I guess changing process is one of the trickiest ones, right? Like these bots have to study very well-defined processes that they can't really deviate from. And then most of the value comes from, you know, the harder situations they would have to handle. So I think changing processes is a really bad one. I forget what year it was. I think it was in 2019. Gartner put out a State of the Union report on RPA and said 99% of the RPA projects started in 2019 will fail in 2020, right? I think it was something like that.
It's a huge number.
Yeah, I think commitment's a piece of it. I think poor strategies and tools, like identifying the wrong use cases, right? Trying to do things that don't make a lot of sense. But, you know, what we're starting to see more is like the true integration of AI into a lot of these tools, right? To make it so they can handle more dynamic situations. You know, the term that we're starting to hear, the new buzz term we hear a lot, is intelligent process automation, which theoretically incorporates intelligence into some of these solutions. But for the most part, when we talk to companies that have deployed RPA or IPA or whatever technologies at scale, most of them have not seen a lot of value from it, right? I think I agree with that Gartner statement that people haven't recognized the value of these kinds of automation technologies.
Totally agree. Yeah, maybe the state of the art is now a little bit different as technology really evolves very fast. So now talking about this involvement before we then move on, because I want to make the point here that at the end of the day, there is always going to be activities that are ideal activities for humans, right? And we maybe only need a slight enhancement to be actually almost unbeatable by any machine to do that, right? So if you said that this was very basic process, right? It basically mimics actions. So RPA would be basically click, 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 or insert this field here. What would the next levels be? And if you look at an overall percentage of the initiatives, how much actually sits in level 1, level 2, or level 3?
I mean, I think the stuff that's really been rolled out and is working is really mostly in that bottom layer.
Yeah.
Right? It's very boring stuff. I'm going to feed you a document. You're going to scan it. You're going to find these 6 fields because they're always in the same place, and you're going to put one in the ERP. You're going to put one in the finance system. Like really boring stuff like that. Yeah, starting to integrate IoT and NLP. I think we've seen some of that. We did a cool project last year with a utility company that was actually integrating IoT and AI into a process automation tool, and it was around the way that they were scheduling power transmission and maintenance, and it did genuinely involve IoT sensors that were pulling data from the grid. So that was a pretty cool project. But yeah, I mean, in terms of really getting to that higher level of dynamically responding to new situations and intelligently handling processes at the level that a human can if they're complicated, we don't see a lot of it.
No, very complicated. And also at this point, honestly, probably the value versus the effort is still not there, right? The effort is just still too high.
Agreed.
I agree. And we don't want to spend an effort on something that at the end is going to be not successful. At the end, we want to get the low-hanging fruits first, maybe the bottom section, and then the a little bit more, let's say, achievable but complicated tasks in the middle section, which is actually, for example, when I look at what we do, camera systems, a detection of failures, visually detection, right? If I look what Tesla does with their autopilot, right, this would be in the middle section. And then the last point, it's still going to take some time. I think a whole industry needs to develop still to get there. And also, it was very interesting on the AI Day from Tesla. I didn't know. I don't know if you have seen it, but they actually developed the hardware to test AI. I don't know if you saw it. So they actually came up with it's like a 20-inch per 20-inch or a little less, 15-inch per 15-inch block of electronical components that is specifically engineered to test AI. Right.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's really good.
Yeah.
Okie dokie. So let's move now on to this the human part, right? At the end, there is many people in factories in every industry. Most of the work that we do is a combination of physical and mental work or cognitive work.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the enhancement of the cognitive part is still a little bit out. I think even NLP, which I think has come a long way. If I think about my Google Home and Alexa, it's pretty incredible. They answer in different languages. I talk to them in German and English. They answer back in the language that I asked them, which is crazy in my opinion. But enhancing the physical part, and there is a term that you said, which is called the industrial athlete. And if you go into some of those plants, specifically manufacturing, heavy manufacturing, those people are athletes. So how are we going to support them? Like, what's your vision over the next 3 to 5 years to make their lives better?
Right. So for a little bit of just background and context in the way that I've seen this space evolve. I mean, I was on a call with a consumer products manufacturer earlier this week who said our goal is to have lights out manufacturing, right? Everyone wants to be Intel. just have these plants that just run on their own. They pump out chips, and nobody, somebody only has to visit if they get an alert that there's a problem. That's not going to happen in most industries, right? Everybody wants it. It's never going to happen. And one of the, so you can replace some people with automation technologies, not everyone. And then I think investing in the people that are actually in your operating facilities is a strong ROI case. And it was starting to happen more and more before the pandemic. I think a lot of the initial Industry 4.0 projects focused on optimizing equipment health, reducing scrap or power consumption, or improving quality. And it was very machine and process focused. And then 2 or 3 years ago, we saw a lot of development of technologies that were focused on enabling the workforce in different ways. And that was ahead of the pandemic, but the pandemic was obviously a massive accelerator for that, because you had staffing shortages, you had people who couldn't travel, retirements accelerated, right? Retiring workforce has been an existential problem, not just in American manufacturing, but globally across all the manufacturing sectors. And that picked up. So, anything under the umbrella of how do we optimize the workforce, whether it's keeping them healthy and safe, enabling them with knowledge on the front line, right? Helping them collaborate remotely. There were a bunch of different categories that were accelerated by the pandemic, but health and safety was certainly top of mind for everybody when the pandemic started.
And I saw that those guys at the beginning, they started to come up with those devices that would actually track distance, right? So distance, contact tracing, etc. I think it's a very short-term thinking of actually putting a gadget on a person. But you actually came back to me and you showed me this company, which is StrongArm Tech. So they came up with this device. It's a wearable. It's without any wires, which is great, I think. It lasts about 24 hours in charge. So what does this device specifically do? And is it the next level of wearable that we should use in the companies?
Yeah, I love this company. This is a mission-driven company. They're not replacing people's jobs with AI. They're saving people's lives with AI, which I really respect. And yeah, I think at the beginning of the pandemic, most of the manufacturing companies we worked with implemented something for exposure tracking and distancing, which is really a boring thing. I think most companies ended up doing it with a Bluetooth app on their phones, right? That's inevitably
use the phones of the workers.
Just use the phones. This does that, right? That's a feature set of the StrongArm platform. They can do exposure tracking and distancing enforcement, but it's really about reducing workplace injuries. So yeah, that sensor device is about half the size of an iPhone. It's very light. You can wear it on your chest or your back, or you can strap it to your belt. It's got about 20 different sensors on it that measure a bunch of things about the person and the way they move and the environment that they're in. But they're compliant with a lot of different data and privacy frameworks. There's no microphones, there's no GPS. And what they're really trying to do is understand the risk profiles of different job types. And so people sometimes push back on the privacy angle. What they say that I love is the person who puts one of these on and then goes out back and smokes cigarettes behind the warehouse all day, that person gets the highest safety score, right? Because they didn't do anything dangerous. So they've incorporated an ergonomic model that was developed by Ohio State. It's kind of like one of the prevailing ergonomic models out there. And they just measure the way that people move while they're doing their jobs. And they build risk profiles of different job types. They score you on a safety metric that they've developed. And the whole point of it is to learn to predictably avoid workplace injuries. So, if you have a person who's picking repetitively, right, doing the picking motion all day, that person, if that person gets hurt and there's lost time and workers' comp, they probably were doing things dangerously for a long time before that specific incident. And so StrongArm's goal is to flag that and correct that kind of behavior so that they can keep these industrial athletes proud and, protected and safe in their jobs, right? And that kind of, if you're a warehouse picker and you have a severe lower back injury, that could end your career. So they're really doing amazing things. Walmart did a big public release with them. Walmart's one of their biggest customers. They're on about 6,000 associates in Walmart distribution centers. And, Walmart, I think in one of their main facilities saw a 60% year-over-year reduction in lower back injuries. So yeah, it's just, they're a super mission-driven company. The technology is fantastic. It does exactly what it's supposed to. And one of the things that I like about this is when you calculate the ROI on people-centric solutions, it can be fuzzy, right? Predictive maintenance is easy because it's like, I spent this much money on the solution, I witnessed this reduction in unplanned downtime, this is how much money I saved. When you invest in things that are focused on people, the math gets a little fuzzier because some of it's harder to calculate, but not this one. It's very clear to calculate the ROI around lost productivity that was avoided and workers' compensation. So I think it's a uniquely ROI driven solution that's focused on enabling the workforce.
That's a very interesting point to think of, which is the ROI on physical health and then ROI on mental health. Think about that. So you talk a little bit about the data. So those guys say, which blew my mind, 12 gigabytes of data per day per sensor. What kind of data? They didn't go too much into detail in the public information. So of course there would be some kind of a gravity sensor where you can check like if the person is running or walking or standing, rotating. What kind of sensors in there? Maybe heart rate. I don't know. So can us give a little bit more detail?
So I think they can package up different sensors depending on the specific use case.
Gotcha.
The primary value is derived from avoiding ergonomic and musculoskeletal injuries, right? So a lot of it is accelerometers. It's measuring the way that people bend and twist and walk and move and lift things. So I think that's the real secret sauce. I've seen projects where, if somebody's interested in a certain kind of particulate that might be in the air in like a chemical plant or on the oil field, they can integrate different environmental sensors that can pick up on particulates. I know that they measure noise and temperature and humidity because those can be leading indicators of people, getting injured for different reasons. And so depending on the customer, I think they can package up different sensors, but the primary value is derived from avoiding those ergonomic injuries. So most of them are ergonomic sensors.
Awesome. Yeah. Now, of course, it is an additional device. It has to be charged additionally. It has to be put on a harness. It of course will accommodate some people. What is your thought process on actually using the existing device that everybody is wearing nowadays, or even some people too? What's the limitations? What have you seen? Why wouldn't we leverage what we already use?
You're totally right. Like if you look at the augmented reality category, like everybody thinks people are going to be running around plants wearing, heads-up displays. That's not going to happen. 99% of augmented reality is always going to be done on your phone because it's easy and everyone has a phone, and you can tune in for a remote guidance session on your phone quickly. Is it as good as a heads-up display? No, it's not, but it's effective enough. And if everyone already has a phone, it's not like you're going to go buy 40,000 headsets, right, to deploy them across the plants. So I agree with you that anything that can naturally leverage the phone or any other device that's already there is going to be useful. I think for the level of detail and rigor that StrongArm applies to its ergonomic modeling, the sensors in these phones are not good enough, right? Like, sure, if I turn my phone this way, it can figure that out, right? And
90 degrees.
Right. And I have like the Google Sky, the star map thing. So I can identify the stars and the constellations for my kids. It's good enough for that. It can tell what position it's in relative to the earth. Is it really sensitive enough to predict that somebody's lifting something at the wrong angle? Probably not, is my guess. So I agree that anytime you can use the existing infrastructure, that's the way to go. But sometimes you don't have enough data, right? You don't have the right sensing capabilities.
Yeah, I haven't thought about that. And you're right. And maybe possibly the position of the cell phone on the body isn't ideal either, since it's below the hips. And lots of the ergonomic issue happens above the hips, right? So if we would wear our phone around our neck, it would be probably different, but it's not happening, right?
Right. That might help. It would be stylish, though. It'd be very fashionable. Yeah, that's the most important thing, is to look good, right?
Yeah, it depends on the screensaver that you're using.
Yeah.
So now everybody that's interested, because on this show, one of my main goals is to actually bring people closer to technology and open up the thought process. And so if somebody is inspired and if somebody wants to actually go into this field, like I always want to give some recommendations from people like you, experts that are already in there, on what specific knowledge, skills they can or should acquire to be valuable in the industry. And I put together this digital knowledge worker set, tech skill sets and worker skill sets. It's maybe a little bit overblown, but maybe if you can give us on the left-hand side one skill that jumps out for you, and on the right-hand side one skill that jumps out for you, that so you say, you know what, if I wouldn't have that skill, it would be very difficult to be in that space and understand the value.
It's a good question. I'm trying to think of what is important. I think it's, I would say, can learn on the job is an important one, just because jobs change very quickly these days,
Super quickly.
right? And people quit, or they change jobs, or they retire, or just people don't show up to work one day. And the amount of tasks that people need to be able to do, specifically within like technical manufacturing jobs, it's a lot. So just the ability to kind of quickly pick up new things. I mean, it's obviously that is aligned with domain knowledge, which is important, right? But I think just, yeah, that ability to continuously learn new things is probably the one that jumps out at me the most.
Very good. Yeah, definitely. And you're gonna be in touch with people, so you're gonna have to have communication skills, and people are going to explain their feelings and their experiences with the technology, and you need to be able to put that back into actions when it comes to developing the next set of equipment or the next set of software. Awesome. Very cool. So we are almost through, man. Time flies by, right? It was very interesting. Anything else that you want to add that you believe is important for people to understand when we talk about this specific technology and what it means for the future of the workforce?
I think we covered it. I just like this idea that a lot of companies are coming around to understand that their most important assets are their people, right? And so investments in technology that are people focused are going to pay off, tremendously. One space we didn't talk about, and we don't have time to talk about, I just think the knowledge and skills space from a tech perspective is really interesting, because within the manufacturing industries, you have so many people retiring. It depends on whose research you read. Some absurd fraction of the manufacturing workforce is set to retire in the next decade. And how do you capture all the skills and knowledge of those people before they go? Because you don't have a ton of people. You don't have a ton of millennials who are excited about working in factories, right? So there's this staffing and knowledge gap problem that's approaching us. That's a really great space to invest in from a tech perspective. So that's one of the ones I'm following too, that I think is really interesting.
Very good. Yeah, that's even more exciting, right? If you're a young talent right now, you can see, as you mentioned, people are retiring, leaving the industry. They have tremendous experience, tremendous knowledge about equipment, about manufacturing processes itself, right? So getting in there, combining it with digital technology, combining it with some automation, can be what we talked about today, or can be other type of automation, robotic automation, whatever, right? As you mentioned, the HEVs, right? And then, of course, always focus on this human-centric approach, which I believe is every technology that we as humans develop from here on, or that we scale from here on, should be always human-centric, because at one point it needs to make our lives better. And appreciate it. I think that's very inspiring. I thank you very much, Isaac. I think we covered it all. I don't know what plans you have for the weekend, if you're going to go out again in the woods, or the camping season over.
Camping's over here in Colorado. I'm taking my kids to a big animatronic dinosaur exhibit tomorrow, which I'm
that's awesome.
Very
that
excited about. And, yeah, no, thank you so much for the opportunity. I really enjoyed it. It was fun, and I'd love to do it again sometime.
Sure, Isaac. Thank you very much. Have a great afternoon. Bye-bye.
Friend, thank you.